Good evening. This is the June 12th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. This meeting is now called to order. Commissioners Rice and Noon will lead us in the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me as we pray. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, again, we come to you with very thankful hearts. We're thankful that you give us the opportunity to serve you, and we're thankful, Lord, that we are in the United States, and you've blessed us. You blessed the state of Texas, and you blessed the city of Longview. We just pray that you give us guidance and direction in everything that we do on the behalf of the citizens of Longview, and give us wisdom. We ask these things in thy name. Amen.
Let's pay our respects to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. We welcome all of our guests tonight. We're here for the presentation and discussion in regards to the City of Longview's Unified Development Code that has been drafted by Fries and Nichols, our consultants. I'll simply say, if you are a part of a large group with a common interest, we ask that you appoint a spokesperson rather than each having to individually restate the same information. When addressing the board, please begin by stating your name and address and try to limit your comments to 5 minutes. Our spokesperson with Fries and Nichols this evening is Mr. Daniel Harrison. Would you please come to the microphone, sir?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us out tonight, and we'll just go ahead and go into the presentation and walk you through, and
Wonderful.
Then, of course, we'll have some discussion at the end. Well, my name is Daniel Harrison, and I'm a planner with Fries and Nichols, and with me tonight is Erica Craycraft and Nabila Nur, and we've been the ones primarily responsible for drafting the different sections. We do have other people working on the project, different elements, our stormwater people, our water, wastewater people, working on their different portions, but the three of us is who you'll see most frequently. So tonight what we'd like to do is take you through the process of where we are and how did we get to tonight, what's been going on since we last met with you. We'll present the top 7 draft items as we've been working through the draft and coming up and discussing items with staff. What were the top seven things that we could share? Also get feedback from you about different policy questions that we'd like your input on to help us craft the draft, and then talk about next steps. So a little bit about the process. It's divided into 3 phases, the entire project. The first part of the project was the diagnostic report. If you remember, we had a diagnostic interviews and we had a community meeting where we gathered a lot of input from users of the ordinance to ask, how's your experience been working through the development process in Longview? Also with interviewed you, council, staff, and gone through that process. We are in the middle of phase 2, and that's where we take the input that we've received and update your ordinance, and that's the Unified Development Code, and we're in that process right now. So we've been working with staff to develop a draft, and now we're getting into the phase of showing the results of that work and getting input on that before we move on to the final phase, which is phase 3, and that's more refinement and going through the adoption process. So some of the highlights that we wanted to put on phase 2, different milestones that we've reached, where we've taken a look at our general provisions and also our subdivision procedures, how we process plats, what platting options are available. We've also worked on our development standards. This is our water and wastewater standards, floodplain standards, also streets. We have that completely drafted. Zoning procedures, how we go about doing plan developments, looking at our zoning district, what type of options we're going to show you. We have a couple of new zoning districts. We also consolidated some zoning districts. We'll take a look at that. Then also parking. So those are the parts that we have drafted right now. So we're about halfway, a little bit more than halfway. And so, there's a lot of information in the UDC, so we don't want to give you the whole big thing because it's a little bit overwhelming to have all that information in there. So what we like to do is divide it into half so we can sort of take a manageable chunk. It's still a chunk, it's still a lot of information in there. But we're dividing that half, and then the second part, we'll be looking at the park dedication signs, building safety, and other sections like that. Then also what we'll do is we'll have more to talk about remaining issues. What you're seeing right now is the first draft, so it's really the beginning of the process of showing people what we have drafted to get input, because what we'd like to do is, now that we have something for people to comment on and look at and to provide us feedback, it's really starting that process to get people's thoughts on the draft. Then, of course, the final staff review once we get all the input back, and we'll work through the final issues with staff. So if we look at the input that we had by phase, looking at phase 1, we go back to August of last year. That's where we started doing our diagnostic interviews and talking with different officials and also to developers. In September, we had a staff meeting to go through some of the input that we heard. We also had the community meeting in October to gather further input. That's when we had writing on the boards, and we did the polling exercises of different questions. Then also, closer to the end of the year in November, that's where we had our joint meeting here, where we looked at the diagnostic report and went through all the issues and the identified topics in the diagnostic report. So that was phase 1. Phase 2, so what have we done to date? We've had 5 different meetings with the staff to develop the draft that you have in front of you. There's 3 more meetings remaining to help us get through those other sections. We are having today's workshop with you to help provide us information, and this is, once again, you'll help provide some information today, but that's not the only opportunity. Of course, working with Michael, he's available every day, so you can touch base with him if you're looking through the document next week or something like that and want to touch base and provide some comments. He's available, and we're available always to listen to your comments. Then also, what we'll do in August is we'll have a review with the development community. So once we get refinements through this process, we'll have a draft for the development community to take a look at, have it available for them for a few weeks, or however much time they'd like to have it before we have a meeting about it. We can do that, and we're just tentatively thinking that would be in August. From that, we'll go and have a joint workshop with you and the council, again, once we can have more information and show you the complete final document. And then look at individual P&Z and council public hearings closer to the end of the year. And of course, we've been talking about if we ever need to extend it out to provide some more opportunities for input and comments. Of course, November and December can be pushed into January or February of the next year. We just want to make sure that we get everyone's comments in and get that in a timely manner. So of course, we can be flexible on the schedule to make sure everyone's has a chance to get their comments in. And then when we're looking on phase 3, and then we touched on that already with hearing more specifically about the individual P&Z public hearing and the council public hearing at the end. So looking at our top 7 issues, so if you're trying to explain to a spouse or a neighbor, what are we doing here? You're a Planning and Zoning Commission member, so you know a lot of the times people ask you, what do you do? And can you just summarize that for me real briefly so I can explain it to somebody? So this is sort of what we're taking a look at, the top 7 items. Number 1, streamlining the development process, because if you remember when we had our last joint meeting, we talked a lot about, what can we do to improve processes to make sure that development is easier in the city, and so we can go through the process cleanly. People are aware of what's going on, where the standards are located so they can find those. So we worked on things like subdivision waivers, zoning variances, special exceptions, alternative compliance, and what that is a way to if someone has a development intent and we have a standard, is there some flexibility in those standards as long as the overall intent and purpose of the regulation is being met? Is there some flexibility on the staff level for approvals that we can have? Item B on there, we looked at the overall process and the flow chart of how platting works, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. Responsible approval authorities, who's responsible, who do you talk to? Roadway sections and parking and special use-based requirements, and we have some slides for all these, and looking at the use chart. So if we're just looking at planning, and I know you can't read this, but it really just illustrates we have 3 processes for processing our plats. It's whether we're, doing post-construction after we approve a plat, or whether we do pre-construction. If I'm constructing my streets, for example, I can do that before or after the plat's approved. So what's the process? We're keeping those standards pretty much the same, just cleaning those up. And then, of course, we have an administrative platting approval for our smaller minor plats that we can take a look at. So the processes really stay the same, but if we're sitting down with someone, we can hand them a sheet that has this more blown up, and they can look at, here's the process, here's the different steps that you need to go through. And so we do have flow charts in there. Also talking about streamlining, we do have tables in there that show, and this is just the Planning and Zoning Commission's table, about who's responsible for looking and deciding different applications. For example, if we're taking a look at, there's a line here for the final plat. What's the P&Z's role involved in the final plat? Well, it's the approval of that final plat. So we can see all the different applications that the P&Z is either reviewing or approving here on this one table. So once again, this is good for when a new Plan and Zoning Commission member comes in. You can see what we're approving. Also, if I'm a developer or just a homeowner, how does this work? So we have this table for the council, P&Z, and different members of the approval authority. Of course, we did update with graphics so we can see what a typical cross-section would look like, where the sidewalk, if it was going to be built as part of the road, where it would go, talking about having a foot difference, foot separation between the edge of the right-of-way and where that sidewalk begins. So you can see clearly different graphics, so we've incorporated different graphics into the document. We also updated the use chart. So when we're looking at zoning and looking at our different zoning districts, what type of uses are allowed. So here we have a couple of slides where you'll see on the far left side, here's all the different types of uses that we allow. And the first one for here would be auto part sales. And so you can see that's the use. You can see all the districts that we have listed. We also have, are there any additional based regulations, which has an easy reference number in there, and you just click on that link and go right to where those regulations would be. And then, of course, we also have the parking. So this is all in one table. All the information has been consolidated and updated just to be on one table. So it'd be very easy for someone to come in, either just to hand this document or just to download it from the webpage. Also, moving on to number 2, user-friendly document. Of course, that's one of the things that we're wanting to do. I mentioned having this on the website so someone can download it in a PDF, keep it on their computer or their iPad, or also they could print one out or pick one up from the city. So we do have hyperlinks in the document that make it easy to navigate. We've also ensured that all our hyperlinks and all our uses have definitions, which is very important. So if anyone was wanting to know what is an auto parts sales, they could click on that definition, take us to the definition section, and we can see exactly what that use in that definition is. And we have some examples of this. Individual district pages with dimensional regulations. That's going to be very useful when someone wants to come in and want to know what can I build on my property, what's my maximum building height, all that information. We have some table of contents that we've put in there, easier to use headings, and then more illustrations. So just showing some of what the hyperlinks would look like. Of course, when we're going through, we'd see a section that says, look at Article E. So if I'm reading this under Section 106, I just click on that link, and then it'd easily take me to Article E. So it's a little bit easier to navigate in a PDF format. So on the computer, it should be easier, and you can, of course, highlight your own information and make this your own document. Also, for our format, we have all our districts are now on just all the information is really listed on one page. And so you can see here's the example for the ag district. There's a purpose statement. What's the purpose of the ag district? And then we have an example here, a graphic that shows here's a typical lot. We're going to have our minimum lot width, depth, and all this information. We're going to have our references to the different regulations, so everything, once again, is on one page as far as to where to find the information. And this is going to be very useful to be able to hand out to someone who comes in and says, I'm in SF4, what are the regulations there? And then so once again, we have this graphic on the screen. And so you can see there's a table that we have different A through G. And so you could take a look at A would be the minimum lot width, so you can look at the diagram, see how we're measuring lot width. And so we have all the different standards and also a building height is in there, so you can see for G, it's showing the building height. So we think using graphics and these ways would be easier than the verbose text that we had in there before. So once again, we think this will be a useful tool for a lot of people looking at the UDC. We also looked at development standards. There's a lot of things that we just didn't change. We just clarified, because if you remember back in our November meeting, we talked a lot about there's not really trying to increase the bar, so to say, as far as our standards go, but make sure that they're in line with the comprehensive plan and to look at where we're trying to proceed moving forward. So we have a landscaping, tree preservation section, which is the same, talking about buffer yards and water and sewer connections. And of course, once again, adding graphics in these different sections, as you can see here on this page, to make it a little bit more clear about what is being required where. Item 4, we did look at some development standards and where those were sort of lacking and just needed to be updated as far as what is typical industry standard. For example, A had increasing the water main size from 6 inches to 8 inches. Of course, this will help with fire flow and different elements. Stormwater classifications, there was some confusion about the existing stormwater. How do we process that? We just made it clear and concise about how we manage stormwater. We can take a look at that section later if you like. Front facade, building materials, non-residential, this is what this applies to and excludes industrial, our industrial districts. So we have some standards for that. And then we'll have some slides when it says direction requested here, like on D, requiring sidewalks. We have a slide later for our discussion time where we'll talk about sidewalks in a little bit more detail. But so development standards with changes are the requiring sidewalks, the traffic impact analysis, street light poles, and also expanding the stacking requirement. And the stacking requirement, for everyone who doesn't know, that is if you're in a drive-through, how many spaces is in that drive-through where people can stack before they proceed. And so this is to prevent cars from lining up into the street, making sure that we have all that maneuvering on site. So if there's a fast food place or something like that, those things are happening on site rather than backing up during the peak times and affecting traffic on the streets. We updated the zoning and the use charts. We added regulations for bed and breakfast and short-term rentals, and we'll have a slide about that here in a second. And also, we evaluated the cumulative zoning and allowing single-family and non-residential districts. We took a look at, when we talk about cumulative zoning, if you took a look at our single-family districts, you'd think that's pretty much where we just allow our residential uses and things like that. And then when we get to our more intense districts, whether there are commercial or industrial districts, that's when you allow those types of uses. So on one side, we have our lighter districts, which is our residential districts, all the way to the industrial district, which allows everything. But then the question is, you know, when we develop in an industrial district, so I could have a single-family house next to an industrial use, is that really the best for the single-family house, and is also that best for the industrial use? Because typically our industrial users don't want to be next to homes, because there's a lot of complaints that come from the home because it's an industrial use, and so they're banging or making loud noises, or they smell or something like that. So is it to the point where we need to sort of take a look at, you know, do we need to limit some of our single-family uses in our districts that are more designed for our heavier uses? So that's what that's talking about, evaluating our cumulative zoning. Some zoning district changes that we wanted to highlight. There's a new single-family district, 4.5, and there's a new townhome district. And this is once again during the diagnostic process, we heard that there was a lot of PDs, and to do single-family development, there's a lot of PDs needed to do this. And so single-family district 4.5, that's created to help address some of those concerns by what's really combining a lot of what's good out of SF4 and also SF5 to help lessen that need to do a PD. Why do we want to lessen a need to do a PD? Because most people don't want to go through the PD process, because that's a rezoning. And there's more things that we can do to allow people to do it by right, rather than to have to come in to get a PD or some type of zoning request. We'd like to set it up for them to do it by right and to just go ahead and proceed with their development rather than having to go through additional steps to do that. There is a new district, 2 new districts. There's one for the Interstate Highway 20 district, and this matches the corridor plan that was recently adopted for the Interstate 20 district. And then the Downtown Transition District, and that's also to help incorporate the downtown vision and what we had for that. So there's 2 new districts. We did consolidate 3 of the 2 family districts, our duplex districts. We had 3 of those. We're consolidating those down into 1. So we just have 1 of those districts. We're also looking at consolidating. We have 3 multi-family districts, MF 1, 2, and 3. And we'd also look at consolidating that into just 1 district, primarily reflecting the MF3 district, because that's what most people are using, and that's typically what most people would expect to have in a multi-family district. We also may look at consolidating 2 or more of the single-family districts. We were taking a look also at SF3, whether we wanted to combine SF3 down into the 4.5 or some variation of that. So one table that we have in there that may be useful during your review of the UDC is the equivalency table. So you can see there's a table, there's a column on the left that has all the previous zoning districts that we have, and then the column on the right is showing the new districts. So, for example, if we're looking at TF 1, 2, 3, you see those translate into just 1 2-family district now. So that's a useful table if you're needing to take a look at, and it also shows the 4 new zoning districts that are being proposed. And once again, this is 7, implementing the existing plans for the small area plans for Interstate Highway 20, and taking a look. There were recommendations for building materials, articulation, and roof design. So we took those recommendations from those plans and incorporated in those specific zoning districts. For the downtown transition and also some central business district standards, also looking at building materials and architectural design. And so we have a couple of examples down there about what that would look like. And then also further implementing the comprehensive plan recommendations and the MPO bike and pedestrian plan. We'll take a look at about that when we look at sidewalks here in just a second. And so that is really the 7 things we wanted to highlight. Of course, there is a lot in the document, and we could talk about anything you'd like, but we really think those were some of the 7 things that really stood out through our discussion with staff and what people would want to know based upon the input we had in the diagnostic report. So on this next section, where we're asking for some direction, what we have here is some topics, and we have about 4 or 5 topics that we just wanted to get your thoughts on. And the first one here is we talked a lot about street light poles. Here's a picture right here about how we want to address street lights in new subdivisions. For example, if we take a look at how are we having street lights, well, typically it's a wooden pole with a light fixture on top is what we see here. Now, there could be some considerations for, do we want to upgrade the type of poles that we have in new subdivisions? Is this standard what we want to keep? There is a cost to it. This is the most affordable cost. If there is an increase in the type of pole, there is also an increase in the amount of the cost to the city, because the way that these poles work, each one of these gets charged to the city a monthly fee by the electric company. So pole like this would typically cost $7 or $10 a month for the city to fund. And then, of course, when the pole needs to be replaced, that cost is already incorporated into what the city has paid in that pole. So if that pole gets knocked down, that's how that's addressed. So if we consider doing different types of poles that are not wooden poles, that cost does increase. And so we talked a lot about that, is do we want to increase the type of poles that we see in subdivisions? Is it that big a deal? There is a cost to it, which may seem as prohibitive, but that's just something that we wanted to take a look at. What's in the current draft is just the staff maintains a list of the approved pole types, which is basically just the wooden pole is what we approve and take a look at. And if you want to do something nicer in your subdivision, creating a HOA to maintain those poles, or to collect the fee for those poles rather than the city paying those fees, because once again the city's just paying for the basic pole. So our first question to you is you know, is there, from your constituents or in your opinion, do you think there is any type of desire to see any different type of street lighting in our neighborhoods? Or basically, are the wooden poles basically okay, and that's sort of what we want to see moving forward? Or do we want to have any options for addressing different type of pole fixtures? And then we can also go through these and start back again so you can see all of them at
I
once.
can throw it. When it says, should the city pay, city doesn't need to be increasing their, we don't have, I would see, we all can see the city doesn't need to be funding additional light poles. We got other things that are more critical than a light pole, so when you came to the point where HOAs or developers would like to upgrade, and we don't have that option, it's really not a question. If we're allowing them already to upgrade their pole, then I think it's a moot point. I wish we all were rich enough, we could all have a nice, expensive light pole outside our house, but we can't afford it, so I would think that's not even a question.
Okay. So the process moving forward would be if someone wanted to do something different, they would need to create a HOA to maintain those poles and to pay for the cost, the additional cost of those poles, or just use the regular wooden poles for that.
What are you doing downtown? Who's paying for those? They're not wooden.
I believe those are paid for by the city.
So that's a contradiction to what we just said.
Well, we're really looking at if we're putting in a new subdivision and, because we weren't really looking back at going back and changing anyone's poles or doing anything like that, but moving forward, if we wanted to take a look at the standard and to do anything different than what was currently required. Because what is currently required is, if we want to do anything different than a wooden pole, then you need to create an HOA, which sometimes we hear, I don't want to create an HOA, but, you know, I want these nicer poles. But, you know, the response would be is, well, you know, someone's got to pay the cost difference between what a wooden pole and whether a concrete or a metal pole would be. So you need to create that HOA to address that additional cost concern. So we just need to know just sort of the process moving forward is as far as wooden poles are what the standard would be. And if anyone wants to exceed the standard, that's fine. An HOA would just need to be created to maintain those poles, and so the city's not bearing that cost. And we just need to make sure that that's the right path to go down.
Okay, I'm going to go on record as saying I really like nice poles. I think they add a lot, and I would like there to be the option for developers to have nice poles. You did not list underground utilities. You want to address that instead of having poles?
The developer could install those underground if they wanted, but it isn't, we don't have a requirement in there for them to be installed underground.
Well, no, there
Right.
wouldn't.
Yeah.
Could there be an incentive?
Oh. Well, yeah, we could take a look if there was ways to incentivize that, and we could come up with some ideas just right off the cuff. You know, if there's a way that if someone wanted to do maybe something a little denser than what the standard zoning would allow, so maybe they're getting more lots, so it's more profitable to do that. And the bonus would be, well, if you put your utilities underground, then you get a density bonus to help offset, you know, the cost of putting those down. So yes, we could definitely take a look at.
I'm just thinking,
doing something
there
like that.
seems to be a lot of poles when you drive around
Mhm.
Longview. Utility poles, light poles, and aesthetically, there might be a way to reduce the number of poles.
Well, I think we can do what we heard both comments. I think what we can do is move forward with the process of just keeping the regular wooden poles. And if anyone want to do something different as far as poles, yes, HOA being required to maintain the cost of that. And also trying to come up with some incentives to say if you bury your utilities, maybe this is some options that we can have, such as a density bonus to help offset your cost of having to bury those utilities.
I like that.
But yes, that's the exact direction that we need to take a look at. So the next one. We wanted to talk about sidewalks, because once again, this was part of, in the comprehensive plan, and also we had a survey question during our community meeting back in October of last year. So right now, the question is, when should sidewalks be required? So the consideration is, the community said both sides of the road, and that was very important. So what we have in the draft right now is along residential streets. So this would be a street in a neighborhood, 4 foot wide on both sides. Then along other streets, just in accordance with the MPO plan, the bike and ped plan that was just adopted. And then also the city engineer could authorize a waiver to this requirement. For example, if we have some topography or there's something else going on where a sidewalk doesn't make sense or is not feasible, we do want to have some way to address some of that. So if we go back and we look at sort of what the polling was at our community meeting, we talked about the inclusion of sidewalks, and it said the majority of respondents prefer sidewalks to be built on both sides on the roadways in the future. So not going back and doing other places, but in the future. And so we had roughly, that was about 60% saying both sides. And then we had about a little less than 20% just one side, and then about 13 or 14% saying nowhere. And then so the majority of the response identified installing sidewalks in currently developed areas as being very important. So that was only about 42% saying in an existing area. So sidewalks are important to people. And then of course, when we had boards at our meeting for people to provide some more detailed, what were they thinking rather than just responding to our survey questions. We had the cost of the sidewalks need to be considered. Other people are saying every arterial needs to have a sidewalk at least on one side. And sidewalks where schools are located was the other sidewalk concern on there. So sort of back to the question of where do we think, as a P&Z or as an individual P&Z member, moving forward, where do you think we should require sidewalks? Are we thinking that requiring sidewalks along new residential streets on both sides, being 4 feet wide, is desirable? And then also along and other streets where they're in agreement with the NPO, so where the trails are being and the different areas identified in the NPO plan. And then, of course, are we okay with the city engineer authorizing a waiver to those requirements?
Give me the whole talk. All right, I guess I'm the only one that's going to talk. Sidewalks are great. And as long as it would enhance our city, we all want them. Once again, you brought up the big factor, cost. I don't want our developers, is that going to be prohibitive to some of our smaller developers? Because it would upgrade the cost of what it would do to create this subdivision for our developers. I mean, there always is that infrastructure cost. In a small area, small town where we're looking to grow, are those, I'm asking you, as you've seen other cities, is that can be a cost impedance? Based on what your other chart shows, we've got to have some right-of-ways and all the spacing and trying to fit these lots. And tell me what you're seeing in other cities, because we all like them, but if I've got, and I look for the small guy, wants to do this, and he's got to throw in these sidewalks and that cost. You said waiver, where you draw that line, but as you've seen, y'all do this for a living. What are other cities adopting? What are you other cities doing our size? I don't need to know what a major city's doing or a major mid-city. I want to know what a sized 100,000 population town, what they're considering and doing. What are you seeing?
If a new subdivision is coming in, the requirement would be for sidewalks. And they would typically be on both sides, because sidewalks are seen as desirable when you're moving your family in. Your option is, do you want kids and people walking in the street, or do you want them off the street and into the sidewalks? Now, sometimes there's no situation, or there's situations where, yeah, you have a street that's a bar ditch and you're walking in the street. But if we're having curb and gutter, is this an opportunity to have sidewalks on there so people can get to and from safely? And rather than, it's also an ADA thing, if we're having people in wheelchairs or elderly people on their scooters driving in the street, would it be easier for them to ride on the sidewalk? As far as the cost goes, it depends. Of course, once you're doing larger developments and larger sizes, it's easier to work that into the cost. They're also not, as far as you're looking at all the home improvements, as far as putting the concrete down, it's not that onerous, I would say. Because if you take a look at, if I'm the developer and I'm doing 10 lots or something like that, maybe I'm just putting the street down and submitting the plat, and then I'm selling the lots. And so we can look at, well, when's the best time to install that sidewalk? Do I want to install that sidewalk when I'm building the street, or do I want to go ahead and pass that on to the homeowner and say, homeowner, before you get your, your certificate of occupancy, let's go ahead and get that sidewalk installed, and we'll see the plans then. So the cost to the developer, it's a little bit of a question, is if you're the developer and then also the builder, yeah, you won't be able to escape that cost. But maybe if you're just the developer and selling the lots, and then someone else is coming in to build their house, as it passed on to them, yes, that'd be the case then. So it's a little yes and no on the sharing.
I do think it makes the properties more marketable. I like the sidewalks. I do have concerns about the waiver requirements. I think that could be overburdened and overly used.
Well, I mean, a 75-foot lot, we've just added $1,500 to the developer's cost with one sidewalk. So,
Makes it more marketable.
how about affordable? Affordable's gonna be the issue for Longview. Yes, it's marketable. I mean, I would love everything to have the fancy light post, but we're not North Dallas. And you say it's not much, but you put 1,500 here and another 1,000 or two here, you basically, and as he said that, the developers are not putting, well, there's one in town right now where they put the sidewalks in with the streets, and they've already been destroyed, and there's only 6 houses in the subdivision. So that's almost a moot point. From a builder standpoint, they got to go at the end. And there are going to be CO issues. So, I think that it's important, but I also think that, as you stated before, when you look down at C, what does that look like?
So the developers will have the opportunity to come and say how they feel about this in August, is that correct?
Yes.
And that's when we hear from the developers.
Yeah, and what we want to do, because like I said, working with staff, and then we want to get y'all's input too before we roll it out, because we want to make sure that we're all sort of in agreement, and then so we sort of worked out how everyone feels before we roll it out to everyone, into the public, and of course the developers, to have a meeting with them to, as was pointed out, all of our private stuff is basically built by developers, so we need their input on what they think is feasible and fair. Because if the city has the goal of a sidewalk and to have more sidewalks, and we don't get them built when the subdivision is constructed originally, or when the house, or when development occurs on that activity, well, when are they going to get built? Well, they're going to be built then by the citizens of Longview, going back and spending tax dollars to put sidewalks in. Now, yes, that's how we get there if the sidewalk's the goal, but then if the sidewalks aren't the goal, and then we don't want sidewalks there, then of course, that issue resolves itself, because the developers don't have to put them in and the city doesn't have to put them in. But then once again, going back to the comprehensive plan and the input that we heard from people, sidewalks are desirable. So the question that the policy question we see moving forward is, sidewalks are desirable, people want those, what's the right way to get those on the ground and people using them, so.
And as you further define whether it's pre or post sidewalk, 'cause I hadn't thought about what you said, but that same subdivision, I know what you're talking about. They did it, try to make it look great. Looks like hell now because they hadn't developed the rest of the lots. Everything, the equipment's come in and
Chewed it
Mr.
all up.
Bulldozer
Yep.
came in and he doesn't care. And he comes in and by the time the house is finished, what was going to be and that would be a piece that I think we would want to make sure we consider putting into this is when those are done and how do you keep those attractive? Because Mr. Developer, I put them in, I can't help it because someone came to destroy them. Then we have this mute point of your marketability. Just looks terrible now because it's destroyed. And who's that responsible party? That'll be something else you'd want to consider, I think, fine tuning later on.
Well, the other thing is who's gonna, if everything is done to this order, does that become a city maintenance issue when it's turned over, as does the street?
There's two things we should highlight, and it's funny that something as simple as a sidewalk, we all take for granted out of how difficult they are to get down to the ground. Yes, the equipment goes and they chew up the sidewalks. So we say, okay, well, we'll just do it only when they're building the house. And so that's the only time that you have to do the sidewalk. Well, what happens when 3 or 4 of those homes are never built, or they're not built for 10 years, and then so you don't have the sidewalk going through so okay, well, we'll switch back to the other way and say, well, okay, let's put them all when the street's in. So that makes the most sense. We'll have a continuous sidewalk. But then we run into that problem that you identified of, well, now we're going to beat up the sidewalks, and they're all going to get chewed up by the heavy machinery rolling over them because they're not designed for that. So that gets down to what you just mentioned is the cost. So, and that's going to be a policy decision as far as who shares the cost of repairing the sidewalks. A lot of cities, it's a 50-50 share with the homeowner. So no, it's not necessarily the city's going to come in and fix all the sidewalks. Other cities do capital improvement programs where they're going to go into a neighborhood and fix all the sidewalks. That could be one option, but I think that'd be a policy. We need to get some more people's thoughts on that, and definitely your thoughts, how we see that moving forward, who maintains or how do we fund sidewalk improvements. So, but that's something that every city struggles with because funding is always limited.
In general, I like sidewalks. Who owns the real estate underneath? Is there an easement granted to the city?
It should be in the right of way. So your right of way for the street, and hold on, we have a nice
It's in that slide.
nice graphic here to help with this question, which will take me just a second. Sorry, a little closer.
No, that's part of marketability, but
Okay.
he's not building the cost of it.
So here, just on this graphic, you would see that the right-of-way really goes, see the property lines on the far right. So what we'd have is it would be in the right-of-way.
Okay.
So that would be land dedicated, the right-of-way is the land dedicated to the city, and we can go into more detail about the legal parts of that actually, but it's going to be land used by the city forever. No, we don't get a deed to the property, but it's public right-of-way. And so what we'll be able to do is we show there being a foot separation between the private property and where the sidewalk would be. Of course, if there needs to be any improvements, we don't want to ride up against the property line to affect someone's property. And we'd have a little bit buffer where we'd see the back of the curb. So that's the general design, but it'd all be in the public right-of-way, so not on private property. There is some cases where if someone, typically you'd see this more in retail development, if they wanted a sidewalk up on their property or something like that was close to the road that didn't have something, you'd put that in an easement or something like that. So it'd still be private property, but there would be probably a public easement for a sidewalk on it. But most of the cases, it's going to be in the right-of-way.
Well, most of that easement is gonna have utilities anyway, right?
Yeah, so there,
The sewer, water taps and.
we don't have that in the presentation, the one with the, okay. We do have another graphic in there that shows where the utilities would be placed under a typical street. So just imagine that, we have our pipes right under basically the sidewalk. So they're not under the street, they're under the sidewalk, which is a lot cheaper to tear up and put back down rather than messing with the street.
So long-term, it would save the city money to have the utilities under the sidewalks rather than the
They
streets?
already are.
Yeah.
They already are.
There are now.
They already are now.
And they already are now,
Yours are
yeah.
under, between your curb and gutter in your,
Okay.
in your yard.
Okay.
Yeah, because we had a comment that we looked at to, do we want to move the utilities under the street versus not having them in the, out from the street? And then so we've continued the policy of having them not under the street. But we have a nice graph. And it's on page 124 if you want to flip to it. But it's basically just a road cross-section showing those pipes underneath
She found that pretty
the
quick.
sidewalks.
She must study these pages.
Can you tell me what page, you said there was a new table comparing the old and the new zoning districts. Can you tell us
Yeah.
what page that is?
Page 177.
Thank you.
So, going back to the question at hand, do we like the policy moving forward? Because like I said, this is just in draft format tonight, and if we want to see, we want it to reflect what you guys think, and so we can move that forward too. If you also want to see what other people think of the draft, of course, that's when we're getting opportunities for, at our community meeting and for the developers to come out and also weigh on that, so we can hear what they think about sidewalks. What do we think about having them along our residential streets, our new residential streets, having those on both sides? Do we think that's a good policy, or do we think one side, or because right now we have it written as two sides, both sides of the street?
This is new construction on a residential street
Yes.
anywhere in this, within our area.
Yes. New only.
Not based on any SF. It would be from 1 to 4.5, the whole gamut.
Oh, no, just for resident, so single family to multifamily.
I mean, so basically encompassing all.
So businesses are in our retail, commercial, office, downtown, would not have to, this would not apply. Now, when we get to the only time that would apply is when we look at that second bullet, when we look at the MPO plan and where they were planning sidewalks. That's also, since we have a plan showing where sidewalks should be because they're trying to connect different parts of the city, we'd also want sidewalks where they show on the plan. So that may be in a commercial or retail or the downtown area.
Understood.
But those are really the only two requirements: residential, both sides, and wherever it shows on the MPO plan.
I like the sidewalks. The only thing that I'm more concerned about is I want to be sure that if we did sidewalks on both sides, that it's not piecemeal together like what you were talking about. I lived in a community before where you had to purchase your sidewalk, but there was no house on either side, so the sidewalk stopped. So that kind of defeats the purpose
Yeah.
of what we're trying to do. Another thing that kind of concerns me is I understand that the utilities are underneath the sidewalk. And when you tie in the water and sewer, I guess that repair would be on the city, correct? You made a mention earlier that it was a 50-50 share. But if you're tying in your neighbor across the street, I want to be sure that the residents of Longview are not paying.
Typically with the meter, it would go in that the green strip between the sidewalk and the back of the curb. So you wouldn't actually have to tear up the street. Now, if we're doing more major repair where we're having to replace a line or there's a leak or something like that, that is when you typically would have to take out the sidewalk. But if it's someone just doing a connection or they're having to replace their sewer line for some reason, if it was an old line that needed to be replaced, you typically don't have to take out the sidewalk. You just dig under it, and then our connection would be right there in the green strip between the curb and the sidewalk.
We would just have to make sure that when that sidewalk was poured, that the utilities would not, if something did happen, it wouldn't have to be torn up. But I also agree with everyone else. There needs to be restrictions on the city engineer to waive the requirement.
Okay. So for now, we'll go ahead and sort of proceed with this policy. Like I said, this is not the last chance saloon or anything like that. We can change this. We'll be able to update this. We could update this several times. We'll have opportunities to update this also when we have, once again, further input from the community and the developers.
Is it standard to have the city engineer do the waivers for that? The only question is if it becomes inconsistent.
Typically, when we're looking at, the construction plans and things like that, depending on when we're requiring the sidewalk, sometimes we'd show those in all those construction plans that the city engineer is taking a look at during the, either before or after the plat's been approved. That's one thing. But when we're looking at the actual construction drawings for the subdivision, the engineer's looking at that. So it's the best time to sort of take a look at what's underneath it. Is there some type of geometry with the street where we need to, move a sidewalk or something like that. So it's pretty common to have it with the engineer, but the other option would be to have it with the city planner on there. So, but typically that's why it would be an engineering thing, because we're doing it with the street. Now, if we shift it to, at the time of building permit, maybe it doesn't need to be in the engineering department, and that could be the city planner. So that could be one option. If it's less tied to the construction of something, since it's a pretty minor element.
Okay.
All right, so we'll proceed with sidewalks as we have those. Traffic impact analysis. The general policy question that we need help deciding is, should traffic impact analysis be required? Consideration is the development pays for its own impacts rather than the rest of the community. Whether if there's a new business going in, is there a turn lane that is needed? Are there things that will impact the traffic that we need to understand? So if it's not built with the development, is the city going back and building it to accommodate? Once again, if it's a turn lane needed to get into a retail development or something like that, would that be something that we'd want to subsidize or just to have the developer pay at the time of the development? So in the current draft, traffic impact analysis can be required at the time of zoning, platting, or at the building permit, or any other development stage. Because once again, it's taking a look at, okay, this development is changing the area and the traffic pattern, and we just need to understand what is the development doing. So it'd only be required when development is expected to generate 5,000 trips per day. And you could go down to as little as over 500 trips per day. And then also, well, depending on how we discussed on the sidewalk requirement, we did have the ability for the city engineer to waive the requirement depending on existing site conditions and things like that. If things are already built, taking a look at the traffic impact analysis would not necessarily be needed in some cases.
Is Mr. Engineer here?
Is it-
The city engineer here?
Yes. He's over there. on the
Where's he
far
hiding?
right.
I don't see him.
Behind.
Oh,
He's right.
what does that cost? A TIA if you ordered one?
TIA, I would say in the range of $5,000 for a retail development. That would be like for a Target. Sorry. I think we had a TIA ordered when the Target development came in, the
Yes,
Hawkins
sir.
Crossing. So it was typically range a couple of $1,000s.
Basically, this is not TIAs, we're not talking more of a residential development type of process or to and from, where this is mainly a retail type of.
Yeah, the only time you get to the level for a residential development is once you're doing something pretty large.
Okay.
So this is not your 10 lot or your 20 lot or something like that.
Just want to clarify.
Yeah.
Well, that wording needs to be codified, because the way I read that, he has 5 days to decide, even if he's putting in a subdivision, whether or not he wants one. If this is more commercial versus residential. Because I'm gonna tell you something, a $5,000 TIA on a subdivision is another added cost to the lot. No good.
So are we looking more in favor of just having it for non-residential development rather than residential development?
That's what I think, but
I concur.
Okay. Yep, we can definitely clarify that.
Excuse me, I just wanted to chime in. Some of the subdivisions that we've had, like off of US 80 west of Delia, that have been hundreds and hundreds of lots in the big development, at that point, there could be some things. So I think it is a threshold of some sort, which some of the language, and we still hadn't gotten to review the exact details of the language and the thresholds in the document to know whether that's appropriate for the community. But there can be some large-scale residential developments where it would be something we would want to request to look at. If you're talking about 500 to 700 lots in a master planned area.
I
Let's
think
hope
that
those
would
come
be fine.
along,
Could
yeah.
you get us a number
Mhm.
in the next draft? I mean, we need to see what you're talking about.
Yeah, we can. And so if we're looking for the larger with, you know, the 100+ lots or something like that to know, because it's important to know how the traffic impact is or how that traffic is impacting an area. You don't ever want to come over a curve or something like that with, now there's, you know, 5,000 trips coming out of a subdivision per day, and there's no turn lane for it. Maybe there'd be a traffic light warranted or something like that. It is one way to help take a look at that, and definitely see there being a cost consideration. But once we get to our larger ones, maybe that cost is rolled up, and if someone's doing, you know, a couple hundred lots or something like that, that's to be expected with a larger type development. Not so much for the 10-acre or the 20-acre or the 10 lot or the 20 lot subdivision. Okay, we'll provide we'll provide some limitation, and we'll draft something that says for only large residential developments.
Well, Robin, somebody defined 5,000 trips a day. What does that look like? What intersection in this town has 5,000 trips a day?
There are a number of them that
Okay.
have that. So it really has to do with, and I'm not a traffic engineer, I'm not the traffic engineer, but I work with one. So it has to do with the size and square footage based on the activity. So I can't recall one off the spot. I think it's a good point of reference to note that at any time that the city engineer or the traffic engineer has requested traffic impact analysis, we've never been in a battle about that. Everyone knew that this was a significant enough. So generally, the people developing know as well. If you're doing it on an existing 2-lane roadway that is over its capacity and is at a level of service that maybe experiences a longer delay than others, then putting 100 lots onto that or 50 lots onto that and generating 200 trips a day could create some problems at traffic signals one way or the other. So I know I didn't exactly answer you, but I can't come up with that.
That's a very good point. But then you get back to the scenario where, is it a city roadway or is it a state roadway? Correct?
That's correct.
George Ritchie, I'm going to use that for an example. As George Ritchie develops going north and east and west, what is that going to look like?
Well, and that's one of the things that I think having the ability to request the traffic impact analysis at such time that develops out we as the city are responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the traffic signals throughout the city in our TxDOT agreement. So I think it's very important that we monitor those impacts to the signals as development occurs, if they're significant enough to create that issue.
Thank you.
And
Yes, sir.
And if I could just add, if you're looking at an average single family, I think the average trip count for just a single family is 10 vehicle trips a day. So you'd be looking at a 500 lot subdivision or something like that would trigger this.
So 5,000 is a pretty substantial number
Yeah,
as a threshold, okay.
yeah. So it's pretty high, which I don't think we'd be seeing too many developments.
Unless there's some
That's why I was
Chick-fil-A.
saying we could reduce that. So
Right.
about 10 trips per
Chick-fil-A
home.
close.
Is what you see on an average daily basis. So we will clarify that wording and add some of that more detail in there so we know exactly how this is affecting. So, all right. The next policy that we needed some input on is, should future single-family homes be allowed in non-residential districts? We have a picture up here, and I know it may be a little hard to see for everyone in the crowd, but what it is we have a single-family home right next to a large metal building, which is either a commercial use, maybe this is a contractor shop or something. But in the future, because once again, if we look at our land use matrix where we show all our uses, what's allowed where, typically when we get to our heavier, more intensive districts, which is our industrial district, we just allow everything. So everything can go into an industrial district. So do we want to say, well, we sort of want to limit that because we think it's going to be better both for our industrial users and also for our single-family users to keep these uses not neighbors. Now, of course, we can look at, setbacks and buffering techniques where maybe if these uses were separated by, 20 feet with some type of screening wall or something like that, maybe that is a little bit better. But in this situation, this is how this occurred. So what we're trying to do is take single-family uses out of our heavier districts. So do we like that idea, or should we continue to allow it? Because the reason why you would say is, why would we want to continue to allow it in new subdivisions? Well, just because that's been the process where that's what we've done previously. So previously, this has been allowed, so if we're changing it, that could sort of be viewed as, well, things are a little bit stricter now, that I used to be able to build a single-family home right next to an industrial user. Now I can't. Is that more strict by the letter of the law? Yes, that would be more strict. So is that something we want to do? It's an opportunity we can take a look at and we think would be an improvement. But once again, if we don't want to think that that's necessarily an issue we need to address right now, we don't have to.
Does this apply to within the city limits zoning only?
So yes, correct. Just where we can do zoning,
Okay.
which is the city limits only.
Michael, how often does this come up?
Not so much with the industrial side, because that is one area that it's prohibitive, but like in commercial areas, we've got a few areas that are zoned commercial that have neighborhoods in them, which prohibits us from regulating businesses out of there. So you've got neighborhoods where businesses can go. People don't necessarily realize that it's zoned commercial. Sorry. Also, areas around town, even in like some of your general retail areas, like along the loop or in some areas, it would not allow people to just go and build a single house on a lot or an area that is probably not suited for that, just because they got a good deal on it or what have you. It would keep those areas better suited for the retail commercial type uses, so you don't have those conflicts in the future.
But you don't see this very often.
I mean, it's all over. I mean, to say that we see it every day, no, but I can tell you there's several places that we've had it over the years that is an issue.
once again, this is future.
Yeah, I mean, we're just,
non-existing. We're just, I
When
think.
you say issue, what issue are you talking about?
well, it'd be just like, so some of the places along the loop where you've got attractive land, does it make sense for somebody to, just because they, for whatever reason, they want to go put a house on it next to any one of those businesses? Is that best for Longview long-term? We've got some area next to Ronnie's business neighborhood over there that's zoned
Absolutely.
heavy commercial. And so we can't prohibit businesses from operating out of the houses there. Most of the people that live there probably don't realize that it's zoned commercial. And the way it is now, the developer doesn't have to rezone it because it's an allowed use. That's an extra step, an extra process, but there's some unintended consequences. And another example, along the loop over in Pine Tree, kind of next to the creek, there's a house there that at one time had a home-based business out of it also. Does that make sense to have a house there? Is there other situations along Highway 80 where it makes sense to have houses mixed in with those businesses? Because once you get a new house, what's the lifespan of that house? It's pretty, 20, 30 years. So, what kind of problems does that create with the adjacent neighbors? It doesn't matter who comes there first. When you have a residence there and they complain about noise and nuisance and everything else, that's why we have zoning, is so that we can control those nuisances and so forth.
I think we shouldn't, but I think there always could be that, what you say earlier in your presentation, but we want to allow that flexibility. Let's go back to that flexibility. I don't like that word, but in this case, I think that's true. We don't want the opportunity for this picture to show up unless there was something which could go through a whole process of what we're here, what the planning is, what you're about, what we're about, what city council about. If there was that exception, that because of this line, because of just the way the properties are laid out. I'll take Leland, for example, if you know where my office is on 80, and go down Leland. Those are very nice houses. There's some nice rental property there. But yet behind me, going down the street to Jenny, that lot's for sale. I don't think they want to put commercial buildings there. The opportunities, what I'd heard, they'd like to put some duplexes, townhomes. So would you say no if we did this? But would that be something, there would be an appeal process that whoever bought that property could come back and say, well, Leland goes real quietly, quickly to residential. Just because I got the big old corner there, right past my business, could there be a house? Well, there's already one on this side of the street, but we're going to say from now on, the guy can't build across the street from him. I think it's a good idea, but I think we also need to put a flexibility factor that there would be this reason for appeal. If you haven't been down Leland, go drive, you'll see the point. They're very well taken care of, older and newer, but across the street there is some land for sale. Does that mean this would say, no? It's because zone heavy commercial. All we could ever put was metal buildings and Bob the plumber could build his shop there. I don't think the people across the street would be appreciative.
We could take a look at having it even as a SUP, so they would still go through you guys and also council just to make sure that.
I think it
you know,
cleans it, but it gives it that, okay, those little exceptions without Big Brother being in charge, it does give the people the opportunity to appeal, and that gives it back to the citizens.
Yeah, and that's, that's where it came from. We're just thinking about all those different issues that we've had over the years that are kind of like, we probably should address this in some way, and these are little things that y'all probably don't think about every day. I mean, most people don't know it's an issue, but us planners, that kind of,
I'm glad to hear about this. I didn't really know this was an issue. What strikes me is downtown, we're trying to make it all walkable and have people living above their businesses. And this looks like, to me, the guy lives next door to his business. And if it's common ownership, that would be something that I think you might look at if we're trying to make
And
things
that
more.
might be that appeal process.
Yeah.
by
Yeah,
inflecting
I
that
think
in
there
instead
has
of
to be a way.
Big Brother, once again, we're giving the people the opportunity. If it doesn't, and he states his case, and we probably got that occurring right now, for business in front, residential in the back. Is that,
Sure.
would that now be, let's make that where
Sure.
it could be friendly but not absolute. How about that?
Yeah.
Michael, don't you in that situation right there, normally, I see in my business every day that typically that little house turns out to be an office building. You know what I'm saying? Over time, I mean.
It can.
and
I
it
mean,
normally
it's
does.
all the situations that we've talked about. Some of the older ones where
You're not gonna tear
you've
down
got
that-
a house in an area that is now a commercial frontage.
You're not
Yeah.
gonna tear that warehouse down, build a house.
No.
You're
no.
gonna convert that into an office
Yeah,
next
most
door,
of the
tear it
time,
down,
it's
gonna be
the
commercial.
vacant lots.
It's just the way it goes.
Or the areas that had zoning for commercial, but then for whatever reason, they put in a neighborhood there and chose not to rezone it.
We'll give you something to
Get you-
develop for us, come back with us.
Yes, we'll look at the SUP and then even maybe a live-work unit or something like that, maybe.
Thank you.
A new use on there. Our last one that we had was bed and breakfast and short-term rental. How do we want to address this? So we need your thoughts for policy moving forward. So how should we regulate these uses? And currently, there's no regulation today. We do know this is a recurring issue. So what we have in the draft is to require a permit from city staff, so to be on a registry, so you know where these uses are, bed and breakfast and our short-term Airbnb, those type of uses. And also, we're going to have some standards in there where you can be removed from the registry if there's noise violations. So if there's things where you're detracting from a neighborhood, because it can be viewed as a hotel, basically, in a neighborhood. Why can you be taken off the registry? So we have some uses in there. Other things, such as having the owner must be on site if we're looking at the bed and breakfast. So the owner being on site to make sure that the guests are being taken care of, those type of elements. And then also must have insurance on the property, so that's why we're having them on the registry, so we can take a look at making sure that they're having insurance, and also paying the hotel occupancy tax, and that's why they're registered, so we can be sure if they're someone's coming here and not staying in one of your hotels that is currently paying occupancy tax to someone staying, that you'd also be getting that from your short-term rentals and your bed and breakfast. So with that, are those, I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of those ideas that we talked about, having a registry and making sure that we can monitor, if they've had 5 complaints for rowdy parties or something like that, that's something we could take a look at. Then also making sure that the owner's on site and having insurance and paying the hotel tax.
So if the owner's on site, what does that mean exactly?
They live there.
Lives there.
And
Lives there.
so you're saying you can only have one B&B?
You could have several. Well, yes, yeah. You would have just one B&B for that. Yeah, I'm thinking you were saying more rooms, but yes, just one bed and breakfast, and you could have several rooms on there, but you'd be only operating one because the owner would need to be on site
Okay.
on that. And once again, that's something to consider if someone. So that would affect someone if I had three of them, and so I wouldn't be able to operate 3 of them. And so would that be an issue? Maybe it's completely, self-service where someone's picking up a key or something like that. But with the providing of a breakfast or something like that, there would be some type of staff or something like that. Typically, they're providing that service. That's where we get to more of our short-term rentals, which is the Airbnb. If I'm going to rent out my house while I'm gone or something like that, do I need to be the owner and do I need to be on site? So just things to consider. Like I said, we don't have rules for this now. What do we think the appropriate rules are for Longview?
And so Airbnb, often the owners aren't on site.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying we would not allow Airbnb in Longview. Is that what you're trying to say?
We would, you could still do whether it's renting by room or renting a guest house. So as long as you were still on site, so there would still be opportunities for Airbnb to operate, because you can either do, if you had a garage apartment or something like that, or if you were had a duplex, or if you had a room that you were renting out on Airbnb. But it would not be the whole rent the whole house for the weekend, is how we currently have it drafted.
We'd love to see some examples from comparable cities.
Okay.
And comparable cities, we hope we're gonna be 300,000 one year, but let's just say we're 100,000. I've always been that same advocate. Let's go see what others have done, see their mistakes, and let's all work this together. But why should I plow that road if it's already been plowed before me? Just might make it simpler and give us the thought process, because I got questions that I'll ask next week about this, is what is a B and B and whatever the other word was. And, it is, but y'all agree? I mean, other people, this is everywhere, you're seeing it, but
Yeah, this is something that many communities are struggling with right now, and it's so much so that the legislature's taken it up a few times. I don't know that they've come up with any way to regulate it, but, it turns out becoming a neighborhood issue is what it is. When you've got homes that are being rented short-term, you don't know what you're getting. And so then it's a business. All those issues come into it, but
I'm highly concerned on what you consider short-term. Because we have that subject in town that nobody here wants to discuss, but we've already got this short-term leasing or whatever you want
Sure.
to call it, some rooms for rent.
and
And
this-
that's already up there. Is that what we're talking about with this? Everybody doesn't want to broach it, I will.
No, but it could have the same impacts. That's why we're talking about, do
So-
we allow it? Do we not allow it? There may be one.
council do?
Well, and on the regulations that he's talking about dealt with, not short-term rental as in like overnight, short-term stay.
But I was trying to
It's
get
more
that from
like
you.
the month
We just
to
went through
month
this a few
type.
weeks or months ago. Is this part of that? Can I get somebody saying, oh, now I'm gonna do it this way and I'm still gonna start renting the room? When the city council just had and addressed that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure when the hotel occupancy tax comes into play. I think if you rent a room for so many days in a row, then that hot tax is no longer applicable. So some of that may have something differentiating the two.
So you'll come back and see, and if y'all can explain what I'm discussing, to make sure that we don't have somebody taking this, if we modified it. I don't want it to get any worse. We just settled that.
Sure.
Let's make it again. But if we had somebody to keep bed and breakfast, I mean, I've stayed in Jefferson. How about you? We might have the opportunity in Longview for somebody to do that. We want that to work, but maybe not in my neighborhood.
Exactly. And that's the question is, there could be some positives. There's obviously some negatives. We don't want to create situations that we've already cleaned up. We just kind of want to hear everybody's feedback on what's good, what's bad, and how do we want to try it.
Give me some examples.
And let me frame some more issues. So if we're looking at bed and breakfast, so typically we see that as a business. It could be operated under your home, and then you are providing, whether you have, let's say you have a nice old home and you turn that into a bed and breakfast where there's several rooms in there so you can rent to several guests. You turn the parlor or the dining room into something bigger and you provide them breakfast, and it operates similar to a hotel. Does it fit into a historic area? Yes. Does it fit into a lot of subdivisions and residential areas? Yes. Do we require the homeowner to live there in this draft? Yes. That would affect if someone was trying to do 2 or 3. So if it was a business model where they were trying to do multiple, that would be an issue that we would need to take a look at and address, because we're treating the short term, and just consider that your Airbnb, where it's basically similar to a hotel where you go online and you book a house and you stay there. So why would we require the owner to live on site for an Airbnb? If we see that as, I'm going to go purchase a home in someone's neighborhood and basically run that as an income stream, Airbnb. So I'm not going to live at that house, but I'm gonna, because oftentimes where we get into some more of the edges of the neater parts of maybe our older communities, people will go and purchase a home and then make it an Airbnb and for a source of income, because typically, maybe you couldn't sell it as a home. But that's one of the things that we just want to be conscious of, and that's our first approach to try to mitigate someone just purchasing a home and turning it into an Airbnb hotel, which, you could still have neighbors on the left and right who are like, man, this is a hotel that operates right next to me. I I don't like that there's someone new every weekend in this house. So that's why we have that owner must be on site, and also to have insurance if something happens there. And of course, we want to make sure that, you know, the place burns down, it's not going to stay, well, they wouldn't necessarily have to be rebuilt, but there'd be financing for it. And also to make sure that we're getting the hotel occupancy tax for that. Because once again, if they're you know, it seemed as an attractive alternative to a hotel, because often it's affordable, you get a more unique stay for a locale. And so, but still someone staying basically and meeting the intent of a guest here in Longview. So try to collect that tax and to operate just like a hotel would. So.
Understood.
And so what's your definition of short-term?
We had it, because I know we have a definition there, 30 days or less.
30 days or less.
30 days or less.
And I think one way that it prevents this from becoming what the other issue is that hot tax. Because if it's less than 30 days, then that hot tax is collected on that stay. So it would probably price it out of that other business model.
Well said.
All right, so, but, and I know we're getting close to wrapping up here, so are there any other thoughts or questions that we want to discuss? Because then I have just a slide that talks about next steps, and we'll be wrapped up. Any other thoughts right now?
I guess one thought I have in looking at it, we're up to 323 pages, and we're just over halfway. Where are we going to end up? 700, 600?
The signs, the building, and I'm trying to remember. I don't think that's going to be as long. I mean, that may be somewhere 100 pages or so, something like that, maybe, or less. So I don't think we'll end up much past 400 on there. But and we can also try to take a look and see how many pages we've gone down from.
Well, that was the other question. I had a constituent ask me, who saw when I was studying it, if this is simpler and you don't have all the sections in there and you're almost to 400, where does it end up? So
Yeah.
it would be nice to know what the other number was.
And remember, this is taking many other chapters and other manuals, and making it concise. So, yeah, it does sound scary when you're going from just the zoning ordinance
Well-
to this to being 300 pages so far, but
When Angela emails it to you and it blows up your system, you say, no, we're not going there.
yeah.
Can't open it.
So, second thing, and I'm not beating this up, I'm gonna go over it again. Why are we dodging around 173? Nothing has come forth at all this time.
Dodging around 173. Page 173?
Yeah. I know a lot of people are very interested to see what's gonna be in there as it relates to this. We keep kicking the can down the road.
Oh, yes, that is in the next section.
Next section?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sorry. The trailers, manufactured homes, and trailer park regulations. That's the section on page 173. We have
They're
a placeholder
avoiding it,
for.
we're not.
No?
I think they're avoiding it, we're not.
Well, I looked at that and that's the first section I turned to.
And I'm gonna bring it up again. B&B has nothing to do with room rentals. Room rentals, we've already addressed at the council level. It's already in city ordinance, correct?
Correct.
It
And
is not something that we will see reorganized or redeveloped within this.
that is not being brought
So
into
that
this.
bullet,
That's a,
that grenade is already, that fuse is done. It's got
Correct.
its enforcements, we've settled that.
it is under the code of ordinances and one of the
Okay,
the
but
business
since we're
chapter.
redeveloping this whole package, I don't want to see that ugly thing come back up again.
We're not, no,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
In a previous discussion, and I had support from several of the commissioners, we had requested that we discuss, as part of this, a notification signage on the proposed rezones. And it may be in here, but I can't find it.
It's in there.
It is?
Yep. We're going to put your name at the bottom of all
That's
those
not a
signs
problem.
too.
I tell you what, this young lady right here's probably got the number in just a second. I think
She
she's got
probably
the
knows that
pages
thing
memorized.
backwards.
Yeah, it's in there.
Just explain what that
And I
was.
think one of the other things that we did also is we're required to notify by law, was it 200?
200.
And I think we've increased that to 300
Good.
and then added some signage and things in there.
Yeah, that's a constituent request because, we had a couple of cases come up that we'd all been driving by last year and then all of a sudden they're here, so.
Page 20 and 21. And we have a note on there that that's a continuing process that we're working on. And that we have, if you look at the very top of page 20, we talk about types of notices, posting of signs on property. The city manager shall maintain an inventory of signs to fulfill the notification requirements listed in table 12, where we list all our times when we have to notify. So having an inventory of signs that could be placed, someone would come up and pick up the sign and place it on the property.
I think that's a very helpful thing to our community.
Regarding landscaping, what changed? Did anything change?
I don't know that anything's changed. We're not looking at strengthening it, as he mentioned. There may be some tweaks of where we've run into inconsistencies just through the use of it over the last 10 years. But I don't know that we've gotten that far into it yet.
One concept that we were trying to put in there, or that we have put in there, is alternative compliance is the term that we're calling it for. And for instance, if we have, because we have a purpose statement at the beginning of the landscaping section that describes the why do we require landscaping, beautification, things like that. But with the alternative compliance, it's to allow for some flexibility. Because if we have a standard in there, and if we have a odd site or something like that we just want to move our landscaping from one side to the other, it's something that staff could take a look at and says, well, that meets the intent of the ordinance. So yes, you don't have to, whether it's one tree per 40 foot or something like that, consolidate them over here or something like that, we could take a look at. And then if that's rejected, they could appeal it to the council if they didn't like that. So we're trying to find some good ways to add some flexibility in there, because we think that's, the directive that we've heard from people. So to provide that flexibility, because at the end of the day, are you providing a nice looking site? Are you meeting the intent of the current regulations? And if you are, then let's find ways to help get that done.
I want to close one chapter. We talked about the residential in the single family and a non-residential. That's brought up because it can happen under heavy commercial, correct?
Residential, single-family residential is an allowed use in all of our zoning districts with the exception of industrial. So in two-family, multifamily, office, neighborhood services, general retail, commercial, they can go anywhere.
So it really would always, though, should be a P and Z issue already, shouldn't it? He's saying that we're not, because we haven't defined it, it hasn't become a, so when I was saying we need to look at that and make it a P and Z issue in the future, correct?
Yeah.
Somebody wants to do that, bring it through, let it work through the process.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to define that, because it's not really UDC. It really comes back to putting it in the UDC, that it would force
Yeah.
it to at least give that option of, what do you say, the office next to, that's not really somebody's house. That's the office they work next door.
It would be a strengthening of the ordinance and a change, but it would still be the option of flexibility, but it gives y'all the oversight to determine that we're not allowing somebody to just go and do it wherever without any considerations to future zoning and future development.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let me just show you the next steps. And what we'll do is we've been taking notes, so we will incorporate the feedback that you have given us. For example, taking a look at providing you some examples of other Airbnb regulations, things like that. Then we're going to have some 3 additional staff meetings and the development community meeting. That will be upcoming. We're going to work on the dates for that because once again, we're taking a look just to be sure that we provide everyone enough time to review it. We don't want to spring it on anyone. And then and when we have the meeting, not to worry, that's not the only time they have to comment on that. You know, it's not going for approval after that meeting. It's going for additional revisions. Because then we have our joint workshop in October, and then, once again, those public hearings before you and also the council in November and December. And yes, adding some extra time, does that move into December, January, February? Yes, that's fine. Our goal is just to be sure that everyone has the opportunity to comment and that we be sure that we get everything right and everyone on board before we go.
Define development community meeting, developers,
Yes,
builders,
yes.
like that large group that you got behind you tonight. They've been very diligent to sit here tonight. So
Yes.
you're saying that would be a publicized something that this group behind you could have that opportunity? I'm
Yes,
asking.
and we'll
Yeah,
have-
They're here, they're gonna wanna speak, but if we're gonna define it, when they can participate in a.
And they can participate now. What our goal is, you know, we're gonna, after tonight, the feedback that we have, and staff is still reviewing this draft to make sure, you know, that all the tweaks that need to be made are in there. And so we're anticipating that over the next few weeks. Once that's completed, we're gonna put it on the city website, and we'll have a little blip on there about what it is, and we're gonna push it out to everybody where they can download it, they can view it online. And really from now on, if you've got comments, questions, the public comment period is open. So feel free to come visit with us. That's where we'll take notes and we'll provide that feedback to the consultants. That'll be in their notes when they come back and they're asking for future direction as well. And we start finalizing it, it'll be based off of that. So don't feel like you have to wait for that time period. You can start commenting now.
But we are gonna set a time.
Yes.
And a defined time. I'm looking at this group. 'cause
Yes,
they're all-
when we further refine the draft and we have, you know, we've gotten it down, nailing it down a little bit more, and that's when we'll go out and it'll probably be more staff-driven meetings where we're presenting it and doing like we've done in the past when we've done building code adoptions and different code changes where we really try to get that feedback more one-on-one.
Where does that have to be? Is that a public notice meeting that I'm asking? Is that meeting, is it gonna be one we gotta post up and set a time and location? Is it a here thing or is it
If
at
we're
the-
gonna have several of you there, yes, we'll have to post that because it
That's what I
it
was
might
asking. We'll have to be
constitute.
careful on how many of us, but.
Yeah.
Okay, but in your timeline, it's showing that that'll be in August. Can we go ahead and give these people the date and tell them the day and time that you're going to be here and you want to talk to them? Because they're here.
Well, I think the other thing too, Madam Chairman, it might behoove them to hear what 4 or 5 of these key people who are sitting here.
Well, we do have a citizen
Yes.
comment
Right.
section that
Because
we're
there may
going to
be an
move
idea
to for
Yeah.
any of these fine developers, and we do appreciate everybody's attendance tonight. We have a good turnout of developers, and we certainly open the floor. Thank you, Daniel, and your team. Good job. Thank you for carrying us through that in a very organized fashion. I'm going to go straight to citizen comment, and if anyone wants to make comments at this point in time, this is the time to do it. Come to the microphone, give us your name, and make them.
I'm on the front row, so I guess I'll start. Scott Hamilton, 1625 East Loop 281. Been a builder in Longview professionally for 37 years and do some developing and as well as building. First of all, I want to start out by saying that I have campaigned vociferously for at least 15 years for us to throw away the old ordinance and come back with something entirely new. So, you know, it's a lot of work for staff, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of work for everybody. But our ordinance started in the late 40s, early 50s, the old ordinance we have. It is a 1949 model. It's been repainted and reupholstered and new tires and brakes and overhauled, and it's just still an antique. And And so that's why so much of the development ends up having to go PD. PD is a terrible model to have to develop under. It allows you to do things that the ordinance didn't allow, but the ordinance is just so antiquated. Consequently, we had to do anything unusual, and everything was unusual by the old ordinance. And PD is just hard. It's slow. It's a lot of uncertainty. And, you know, if you're a developer, you need a certain amount of certainty. When you go into something, you need to be able to make a budget. It's just like any other business plan. And if you don't have enough certainty, it's just hard to go down that road and start spending money when you don't know what you're going to have to do. And every time you make a change, it's burdensome. So I applaud that we're finally getting a new development code. Now, I don't remember which one of the famous people it was. Maybe it was, I think it was Abraham Lincoln, who made a statement. He says there's two things in life you really don't want to watch being made. One of them is sausages, and the other one is laws, because there's ugly things that go in there that you really don't want to see. Well, you know, a sausage, you eat it and you're done. Okay, laws we have to live with for a long time. The old ordinance we've lived with for 70-something years. How long is it going to be before this thing ever gets redone again? So we want to be sure we've got it right. So I applaud everybody's efforts in that. I've got several comments and a couple of questions for Mr. Harrison, just because I don't know, and I know I've got a short time period. So my questions for Mr. Harrison, if he would have time to answer those. What, if anything, is different in the UDC we've got than 95% of other cities? If that question makes sense. I mean, are there things that we're putting in here that are just like totally unique that we need to be really considering? Or is this, all of this is pretty much like, hey, it's happening somewhere else, it's working? So that's an important question. The next question I have is, does this, as we're doing it, does it provide a prescriptive approach to developing most modern development styles? Okay, I'm gonna go through my list of questions if you don't mind, and then, you know, they give me 5 minutes, so I gotta go fast, right? One of the things I'm concerned about, you know, when you look in here and it, you know, it's like, we've got the little models and, you know, like SF5 has a 50-foot minimum front width. Well, if you're trying to do a serpentine subdivision like Hollybrook Coves, okay, you're necessarily going to have a lot of lots that are narrower in front, they're wider in back, okay? I want to make sure that because we've got a plan that works great for a grid, nobody wants to live in grid subdivisions anymore. That's 1950s models again. So do our requirements work for modern style development? Things like, everybody's probably seen Hollywood Coves. It's very desirable. People like it. And as developers, what we have to be able to do is we have to be able to build the product that people want. Okay? I don't want to try to sell them something that's not really what they want. I want to sell them what they want. And so my concern is that our ordinance allows developers to build the product that people want. Now, it has to be safe. It has to be stuff that the city can maintain at a reasonable cost, okay? But I will guarantee you that every builder here has the same concern. We've got to be able to put, because we're all competing against everything else that's out there already. We have to have the ability to build the product that people want. That's what everybody else in the industry does, whether it's fashion, automobiles, it doesn't matter. They're building the latest and greatest, and that's what people want. And we want that opportunity as well, okay? My next question, and this is outside maybe, but it's a question I think you would know. In Longview, in our gated subdivisions, our homeowners, our taxpayers pay the full taxes, same as people who live in ungated subdivisions, okay? But they have to pay to do their own street repairs and all that sort of thing. because they have a gate. A gate is something that is a matter of security. That's why people want it. People want to live in secure neighborhoods, and we want to provide them secure neighborhoods. It's part of what they want. Is there a means where other cities are providing street maintenance in gated communities? I hadn't had anybody. I figured you'd probably know the answer to that question, because that's something that can help us as a city. If we can have the ordinance in such a way so that we can provide the secure neighborhoods that our citizens want, and they're paying for the road maintenance, they should get it. That's the way I look at that. Last question. This one, this one of my pet peeves, and the engineers cringe every time I bring it up. What percentage of cities allow the utilities to be under the street, as opposed to what percentage, like what we're putting in our ordinance where they have to be outside the pavement? I know there's a lot of cities that prefer them under the pavement. I would like to know how that mix is, and maybe it's my perception. And then I'm going to make a suggestion. If our utilities people, they feel like it's more expensive to put the utilities under the street because of maintenance, then give us as developers the option to save the city a whole lot of maintenance money. If we concrete the street, and y'all guys will have to agree, if we concreted the street, that saves the city a lot of money in maintenance, right? You don't have to come back and do asphalt repairs. So maybe if we're going to concrete the street, can we put the utilities under the street? Now, that's all a matter of beautification, because what happens when the utilities are outside the street, we end up having to clear this big right-of-way. We're cutting the roots on all the trees, any big tree in a 100-foot swath, maybe an 80-foot swath, but you drive through these neighborhoods that were forests, and there's almost no trees left. And there's such a narrow band in a lot between the zone that is killed because we've cut all the roots and what we have to do to build a lot. If you have really nice trees, there's only about a 10-foot width on most lots where trees are savable. If we move the utilities under the pavement, we're going to double that to about 20 feet. We'll be able to save a whole lot more of the big old heritage trees and keep our city beautiful, okay? And that's all it's about. It's about having a beautiful city, okay? So I would love to see some arrangement where we can put the utilities underneath the street, because, you know, right now we've got the other utilities. City of SWEPCO doesn't want to be. They have to be outside on the private, you know, and by the time you get done just trenching in all this stuff, any tree that's within a big tree within 15, 16 feet of the curb is going to die. We've cut half the roots on the tree. Okay? So anyway, comments real fast.
It's 5 minutes. Should I call it?
On the light pole issue, I find that frustrating when I've wanted to go in and pay the cost for a more expensive light pole to have a good-looking light pole, but because it has a higher maintenance cost associated with it, I was told, no, I can't do that unless the HOA takes care of that. Okay? I mean, I was willing to pay, I think it was $800 or $900 a pole extra to get the real nice decorative, they were made out of concrete with a decorative finish, really nice light poles, and I was told, no, we can't do that. I think there ought to be an option in that the developer, if he wants to pay the upgraded upfront cost for the pole, the city ought to be happy to pay a little bit of extra monthly for the long-term maintenance or long-term replacement. That just seems like a great compromise if the developer wants to do that. I'm a fan of sidewalks. People want sidewalks. People want to buy in neighborhoods with sidewalks. Hasn't been too long ago that our public utilities would not let us put sidewalks in subdivisions. That's a crying shame. It's a crying shame. I'm glad that we've got it, and I wholeheartedly support it. I'm working in a development right now, Pecan Crest, where the sidewalks were put in. And you know what I learned is I have to be the sidewalk Nazi. Okay, I'm the developer and the builder. And I've just got to take care of the sidewalks. You know, people are used to just running in and out wherever they want to, and I have to control that. If I control it, the sidewalks are fine. It's just something, it's a learning curve that builders and developers are going to have to figure out. But they don't have to get torn up. Okay? I mean, when I started out there, a lot of them got torn up. I was replacing a lot, and I said, this is stupid, and I figured out a way to control that. So, cut way down on that. It is a cost, but it's something that people want, and people want to be in neighborhoods with sidewalks, so that's a good thing.
Scott, one more minute.
Oh, righty, I'm sorry. The TIAs, the traffic studies, what is important for developers, okay, and there have been developers who got stuck with that who were very upset because they didn't know they were going to have to put that cost out. What's important is that we codify when that's required. And that way a developer goes into it knowing if he's going to have to do it or not. That's the main thing, is let them set up their business plans so that they know what they have to do. That's the most important thing in all of development, is that there's a set of rules, you know what the rules are, here's what you're going to have to do. Last thing, I'll shut up. The August development meeting, thank you for getting that included in the calendar that has gone around before. That was not included in that previous calendar that was going around. And so I was concerned, was this, you know, when was going to be the opportunity, and I was looking for where should I show up. So thank y'all for adding that to the calendar. And then the last comment, just in looking at that, the idea of trying to adopt this in December, that doesn't look good. That kind of looks like a political science kind of a deal where it's like, okay, nobody's going to pay attention in December, so let's run it through the council in December. So when everybody's busy, nobody's paying attention, nobody has time. You know, I would get rid of that right away. Let's plan on doing it in January or February, just when people have the opportunity and the time to look at it and study it and think about it. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Good comments, and we do want you to make certain that you're back in August at our meeting to finish what I had to kind of take a shortcut on there for a moment. Thank you so much. Second speaker. Yes, come up, please.
My name is David Johnson. I'm a builder, but I'm also here as the current president of the East Texas Builder Association, and therefore represent close to 400 members that will be one way or the other affected by this new ordinance. I want to also utter that I think this is probably something that's very good. There's a lot of good in here, and there's probably some things that maybe need to be looked at a little tighter. What I would ask as the president of the association, I have some questions that are just as a builder, but as a president, if it would be possible, I was glad to hear that this will be open to the public. I was looking at the size of the draft. I can't ask enough questions based on the size of what that is right now, but I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for it. A lot of things were discussed tonight, for example, like the sidewalks and all that, and I'm sure when you had that public forum and you asked, do you want sidewalks? Well, sure, I want sidewalks. It looks good. If you had asked them, do you want to pay for those sidewalks? You might have had a slightly different response. Now, I agree. I think the sidewalks look great. And I think the questions that you guys are asking are really good questions. But I think we need to look at what are the cost impacts of this to the final consumer. There's going to be cost impacts to the developer, to the builder, and to the consumer. Will those impacts be adjusted through the appraisals? Are they going to increase the property when you add all these different variables that add up to something? I can assure you the developer will pass those costs on to the builder or to the homeowner. And so I'm not saying these are things that need to take away items out of it, but these are things that we should consider. I would, I guess, formally like to ask as President Association if the city staff would consider having a small group of representatives in these fields be a part of maybe some select meetings after we've had a chance to perhaps look at the draft and have some constructive questions, so we're not just sort of shooting off the hip. I think this is very important to the city. We want the city to prosper. We want the development to be something that attracts people from out of area to come to our city. And I know we have to have structure for that, and we have to have planning for that. But the greater impact of this needs to be looked at. And I think when the council votes on this, they need to do it with the eyes open that, yes, this right here will have this impact, might have this financial impact. Is this good or bad? Just so that we go with our eyes open into this. A couple, question that I personally had, and this is not as the president of the association, was, for example, is there anything in here, I use George Ritchie as an example of utility sharing, and I might not be calling that out as the right verbiage, but for example, my understanding is there's no sewer lines out on George Ritchie Road, but it's the next area that is going to be hopefully highly developed. So I guess my question would be is it one of those things when a developer comes in there, and let's say the property that he's looking for is midway in George Ritchie, okay, and they have to run sewer from quite a ways away, and that's a pretty good sized cost. Then someone else comes in and buys a property next to them, and they're like, hey, great, I got free sewer. So the first developer had to pay all that cost. Is there any utility sharing, like I've heard other cities do, where the next person that comes in has to reimburse their percentage to that first developer who had initial cost as a way to incentivize that first initial guys that come in here to want to develop, when they know long-term they can get some of their costs back from the other people since the city did not put those utilities in at first. So that's a question that I would have. Are any of those questions even looked into at this point? Is that something that would be part of this? Is that something that's ever been considered? That's just, one of mine as a way of enticing development in areas where we have some utilities, but we don't have all the utilities. Or is it going to make it where all those areas out there are going to be anaerobic systems and things like that? So I guess that's a question.
One of the things that, was talked about early in the process was, how do you share the cost in that? Because as you described, it is the first developer going in there, putting in a lot of the infrastructure. So one way to address that is, there's been discussion about impact fees or whatever, and that's one way that you can cost out. You'd look at the water and also the wastewater to see how those would be addressed, and then have a fee basically based upon new development's cost of that. That was sort of seen as something that didn't want to be approached as far as sharing that cost. And I think the main point of that was not having an impact fee to charge new development. But the flip side is just sort of what you pointed out. The first guy is stuck with building that sewer line out unless there's some type of joint capital and improvement program that has a sewer line running out that street. There won't be one until a developer puts one out there.
So my point of that is it puts a lot of burden on whoever that first developer is. They got to have some deep pockets. Running sewer that long, that far is a pretty big deal. And those are some things that perhaps the city might want to look at. As I know that there are a lot of cities, I'm sure y'all study a lot of different cities to come up with this plan. Surely there are cities that have figured out a way to do something that is fair, that works, and that would incentivize people to develop areas that when they look at it on this basis go, this is great, I love the property, I love the location, but the infrastructure cost for me is so high. All these things that are in here are going to have dual effects. They're going to streamline things, but then there are going to be unintended consequences of cost. And so my only concern would be that the Builder Association, I'm back to being president again, would be allowed to review these maybe up to 400 pages, since we are the ones who are going to have the most impact. Not from a standpoint of criticism or anything like that, but to be more partners with this process where we can give you input that, hey, these are some of the things that you're going to see as an effect that, we know we're going to have to, the costs will be here, or, hey, these are really good. This is going to save the city money because, for example, like some of the things that Scott talked about, where, you'll find that builders try to be pretty resourceful. They have clients, the clients want it as cheap as possible, and we have to come up with good ways of trying to do that. Well, we might be able to give benefit to this process and helping the city see some things that from a different perspective. So that's all I ask. I appreciate the opportunity that we'll have again, and I guess for whenever that meeting is in August sometime, and I think that's all I had to say, so I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I appreciate your time also. And do we have a third speaker? Have they said it all? I want you to know how much we do appreciate your being here, that you are pledging to be partners in this benefits of this process. Thank you for your comments. They're invaluable to our commissioners. Mr. Harrison, did you have another statement that you needed to make at this point?
Yeah, did you want me to respond to the questions that Mr. Hamilton proposed? Okay. I can do those real
Yes.
quick. Okay.
It's agreed by the commissioners that we do want you to respond. Thank you.
Okay, and, okay, so what, first question was, what is anything that is different than other cities? We do have some residential standards, that the fact that, you know, sort of what is different is the lack of some residential standards, because typically when we're working in other cities as far as, are there any building facade materials or stuff like that, we don't necessarily have those in the code right now, so we're not necessarily implementing those. So what's a little bit different for that? And I was going to mention, the other thing was, for instance, some of the bonding that we have in our subdivision regulations typically. For instance, let's just pretend we had a subdivision going on and the developer walks away after the plat's approved and everything like that, but we have bond. Typically, that's about 100%, you know, for the performance bond. Most cities require like 110% or something like that, but current standard's 100. So just keeping those standards, things like that. The second question is this more prescriptive or is it flexible? We think there's a lot of flexibility in the design because we talked a little bit about the grid street and things like that. Yes, there's going to be standards for you need to have a light pole every 600 feet, but that doesn't necessarily make the street straight, or you know, we'll have like a block length in there. So there is standards in there, but we think there's a lot of flexibility in there. There's also, we discussed about the alternative compliance. We're looking at more ways to incorporate that through our different sections of the zoning. So once again, we know the end result, and we want to have some flexibility if someone's coming through to do something a little bit different without having to do the PD, without having to go through a whole big, long process. And so what ways can we address that? We talked also about the gated subdivisions and private streets. For instance, if, and most people don't know, and so if anyone's watching on TV, I'll sort of explain. If a street is something that, a plat is how I divide land and I dedicate my property forever to the city, because the road is actually in a right-of-way that's dedicated on a plat. And so typically, anyone could be on that street. It doesn't matter. It's a city street. It's a public street. It's open to everyone. So some subdivisions, when they like to come in, they like to be private streets. So that street is typically built and maintained. Well, all the streets are built by developers, but that road is continuing to be maintained by the residents of that subdivision. And why would anyone want to do that? Because there's a cost associated, and roads are expensive. Well, the reason why people would want to do that is you can tell people that they can't be on your street. You get to allow people to be on your street. You have a gate, you have a code. As a regular citizen, you cannot go on that street and walk that street. You can't walk on the sidewalk. So as a trade-off for that, since that's not really accepted by the public, there's no maintenance that goes on that. So it does seem like if you're paying taxes for a private street, would the city still maintain it? Typically, since it's not public, that wouldn't be maintained. It's similar to if someone was going to build a private park in their subdivision. would the city maintain a private park? No, because it's limited access only to those users of the subdivision. So are there ways that you can look at helping fund those streets? Typically, those streets, when the maintenance becomes an issue, that's when the residents of that subdivision come to the city and ask, will you accept my street now, and we'll turn over the street and take the gate down so you can fix the street. Because typically, if it's a homeowners association, then they're trying to get funds to fix whatever thousands of dollars worth of repair for a street. It's also often very expensive. Why the street works great for 10, 20 years, once we start having problems with the street, that's when they like to convert to public streets. But then you get that situation of, does the city want to accept it now? Because why do we want to spend public tax dollars on a private thing? So it's a tricky situation as far as private streets and how do you want to maintain those and move those forward. You could have the option of, yes, we'll go ahead and accept them and spend tax dollars on them. You are citizens paying taxes. But then also you'd have the situation of, no, that street's always been limited access and none of the rest of the citizens have had access to it. Why are you spending tax dollars on that? So it's a little bit tricky of a situation. So that's more of a policy. That's sort of the framework that we can take a look at the private streets. One, if you more are accepting of those, yes, it can help those homeowners, but two, also, those are limited and people haven't had access to them. And if it was a park, you'd have probably a lot more outcry of like, why are we spending money, public money on a private park? So similar to that situation, and on that plat that I was talking about, that right-of-way is not dedicated to the city, it's dedicated to the HOA to maintain. So they're the ones actually maintaining that, so it's difficult for spending public money on private property for their benefit. So it is a big situation felt by a lot of cities. And then a mix of utilities under the streets. Yes, there's a mixture. I don't have an exact ratio, good ratio of like 25% do it under the street versus 75. Typically, we see utilities under the streets when we get into our denser developments. If you think of downtowns, that's pretty much where we have them all under the street, that just because it's always easier. Yes, we do have to cut up the streets more often, and then it's a little bit more of a patchwork and things like that. There is an advantage sometimes where if we have our utilities under the street, well, then it's a lot less likely if someone has a backhoe or something like that, they'd hit a line. But typically, if that does happen, they should have liability insurance if they're destroying some public property. So hopefully that would be addressed. But it really goes back to just it's generally cheaper to have it outside from underneath the road. But several cities do put the water lines and the manhole covers in the road, and to address it that way. It's just there is a bigger cost to tear up a street than tear up a sidewalk. But then if the goal is to try to save as many trees, and the thinking would be, why are we trying to put them under the street? And if the benefit and the long-term advantages of having them under the street, if that's the policy that we wanted to move forward with, that's what we could do. And I think I addressed all those. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Any other citizen comments? Staff update, please.
I just wanted to remind you that we will be having a regularly scheduled planning and zoning meeting next Tuesday, and you will get your packets in the mail very shortly.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you so much for your attendance. This meeting is adjourned.